The wrestling world has been described by some as a circus, so when it comes to picking an announcer to lead the audience through the weekly episodic trials of their favorite wrestlers, why not send in a clown? That's exactly what Lexington-based promotion International Championship Wrestling, also known as ICW, did in 1982 when they tapped Tim Eppenstein to be their lead announcer. Eppenstein had already made a name for himself at WTVQ Channel 36 as Happy the Clown, but he was about to step into a world more surreal than any circus Happy could have ever worked for.
Well, hello everybody, and how are you today?
That's Eppenstein as Happy the Clown, which started on WTVQ in 1976 in a rather strange way.
Very strange story there. The general manager of WTVQ at that time was Clark W. Davis. And Mr. Davis had invented Bozo the Clown, but he sold that character to a guy named Larry Harmon in Chicago. But he had another character that he had thought of as Happy, but he had never really done a show with it. So he decided that in the afternoons that would be the type of show he wanted on the air. So all summer long, he had rehearsed it with a guy named Phil, and the show was going to start on a Monday. And on Friday afternoon, Phil quit. And so Clark Davis called me into his office and had a pair of high-top Converse shoes sitting on his desk. And I recognized those from being the Happy shoes, so to speak. Yeah. And he threw them at me. And I said, no. And he finally convinced me. He said, I want you to come over to my house all weekend long, and we're going to rehearse and practice and talk about it. I said, well, what am I going to wear on the air? He goes, well, don't worry about that. My wife will think of something you can wear. So it ended up being an old tuxedo that she had sewn stuff on. So we practiced all weekend, and then on Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we went live. They had already got the set. The set was from a play that was done in Lexington, and it was the interior portion of a house, a huge set that took up more than a quarter of the studio, which was weird because we needed the room. But the set had stairs going up. It had a front door. Mm-hmm. It had a window that we'd taken a window out and put in a back then blue screen instead of what's now called a green screen. Right. So we could use effects there. So I just started out doing the show. Froggy was the voice of Froggy. Was a man named Mike McMillan who had worked at Channel 13 with me. And he had done Froggy years ago when I was very young. So he had the Froggy character all along. And so we just
put the two together and
nothing was written down. We just ad-libbed everything all the time.
Really?
We never knew what we were going to do. Never. And a well-known fact that Mike drank rather heavily, even before the show. And sometimes he would come in and didn't half know where he was. And so and I was always worried he was going to say something absolutely crazy.
Was this a live show? Did this go out live?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So sometimes he thought he actually was the frog.
Yes.
Probably. Eppenstein played Happy for 3 years until the workload became too much.
It was a live show 5 days a week.
Wow.
On the weekends, we would go out and do personal appearances. We would go, Owensville was an interesting faraway place we went to. We went to a movie theater and they showed the Three Stooges and charged everybody $1 a piece to get in. And then at intermission, Happy and Froggy, we had a portable set and we would do a little spiel and then they would show the next movie. We would do parades. We would do things at Christmas time. Till finally got to the point I'd gone 3 years with hardly a day off.
Right, yeah.
And I said, this is just taking its toll physically and emotionally on me. So I just quit. I said, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it. They did have an end to it. We had the director at that time, whose name was Arnie, came out with a farmer outfit on. He said that he had bought the house that we supposedly lived in, and we had moved away. And at the very end, they turned out the studio lights, and it just went went to black.
After the end of Happy, Eppenstein continued to work for WTVQ and eventually became involved in the wrestling program the station was producing. ICW, which was ran by Angelo Poffo, tapped Eppenstein to be their announcer due in large part to the relationship Eppenstein had formed with Poffo's son, future Hall of Fame wrestler Macho Man Randy Savage.
I was doing audio during the daytime, doing voiceover parts of commercials and on-camera commercials. And when they first started taping the ICW shows, I ran audio on the early shows.
Oh, okay.
So, and Randy spent 50% of his time in the control room and 50% of his time out at the ring. Mm-hmm. So I got to know him then behind the scenes. And so, you know, he knew my personality, I knew his. And when their original announcer, he quit because it was too far to drive from Somerset to Lexington once a week.
Yeah.
And so Randy said, "Will you do it?" I said, "Well, sure." You know.
So had you had any experience calling anything like
no,
that, sports or anything?
But I had watched them, you know, tape all those shows previous, so I kind of knew what was going on. And Randy was so good at knowing exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
He had it all mapped out so wonderful that he could say, you know, in such and such a match, you know, 2 minutes into it, this is going to happen.
This time, he has gone out to a separate production company, videotaped this interview, sent it to the station. We have already looked at it because we would, always look at things that Randy Savage would send to us to see any possible objectionable material. And this message, he said, is directed toward Ox Baker. He has some things to say directly to Ox, not directly, but through the videotape to Ox. And this is quite something to see, so let's just take a look at that. If our director, Jim Piston, will go ahead and roll it, let's look at it.
Freak out! Freak out! Message to Ox Baker, man. A message to Ox Baker. Concentrate hard. CW World Heavyweight Champion, man. In a match with the greatest legend of all time, man. Get yourself a reputation, man. Get yourself a reputation.
Eppenstein says Savage was the head of the production at ICW.
Randy kept a loose leaf binder with him at all times. He had months and months in advance of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And before every show, he'd have to get all the wrestlers around and explain to them, okay, this show is going to air here, here, and here. But say Danville, Virginia audience doesn't know that that's going to happen yet. So we've got to, you know, remember the time frame that this is going to happen, and don't, because they knew what in advance what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So he'd have to get all straight in their minds where they were, what the time frame was, and, you know, you're not going to turn into a heel yet.
Right.
So it was like a pep talk he would give them before they started.
Eppenstein says there were many wrestlers who knew about his past as Happy. So, did they give you a hard time over it? Was there any talk about you being Happy the Clown on the ICW shows? Or
they would laugh about it. You know, they said, you know, and because of doing the Happy Show for 3 years, my gestures became larger than life sometimes.
Right.
And because I was so used to doing that, I had to control not acting like Happy during the wrestling.
Eppenstein had some memorable moments working for the Poffos.
One of my most interesting things was the very first time I did it, and it was over, and they packed the ring away and got everything down. And Randy goes, "Well, you know, we're going to pay you now. You need to come around back." I said, "What do you mean around back?" He goes, we parked around back. I said, "Okay." So we ran around back, and Angelo Poffo was there, and they had a really, really old gold-covered Mercedes 4-door. He popped open the trunk, and it looked just like a cash register on the inside. They had literally thousands of dollars in there. And he reached in and peeled off the money and gave it to me. And we called him the miser, of course, instead of Angelo. Yeah. And he said his famous saying directly to me, because the miser knows that money's the most important thing in the world. As he handed me the money.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And he said, "We never deal in checks. We only deal in cash." Then just jokingly, I said, "You know, don't you feel kind of dangerous riding around with all that money in the car?" He goes, "No, everyone knows whose car it is.
Was there anyone that was just difficult to work with, that you just didn't want to work with, you didn't really want to have to be in a segment with? Or
The Sheik
yeah,
was out there, on his own. And no matter what Randy told him to do or say, he just did not pay any attention to it all. He just did whatever he wanted to do.
yeah.
And that famous story about we were doing a promo, the Sheik was sitting on one side and Randy was on the other, and I was in the middle. And Randy, of course, was doing all the talking, and I looked over, and the Sheik had the bottom part of my necktie in his mouth, and he kept chewing on it till he got it like up here and was choking me with my own tie. And Randy did not miss a beat. He just kept on going, and just kind of looked at him like, okay,
They closed in 1984. Did you have any desire to continue as a wrestling announcer after ICW closed, or was that just sort of right place, right time? Or?
Right place, right time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, speaking of history and stuff, of kind of a renewed interest in this ICW era?
I like it a lot because, to me, they were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Some of the things that Randy thought of were just genius, like the famous Pez in a box.
We are back. As you can see, Ronnie Garvin is bringing a gigantic box through our back door here at the studios.
This is a present, man. This is Mrs. Macho Man. Miss Macho Man, 1981. Yeah.
You heard that. You heard that. Let me see if I can get out of the way here. Find Ronnie Garvin. Ronnie is back here in the back. Ronnie, this looks like the same box that you had the Canadian Bumblebee in.
Well, you never know what you can put about anything in the box. And I figure Randy Savage would like a nice present. And I brought him one. I'm sure he's going to like it.
Savage telling Crusher Broomfield to open the box. Here it comes. What do we have in here? What is this? Okay, there you have it. Ronnie Garvin has brought in Pistol Pez Wadley, dressed up to be Miss Macho.
The Pez in the box thing, to me, was ingenious. They had milked that for several months.
And that was Pistol Pez
As
Watley.
Pistol Pez Watley came in a box. I knew they had the box because they brought the sides in and put together at the station. I had no idea who or what was in it because they truly wanted my reaction to when it happened.
Right.
And that and the Oxbaker false teeth story was great.
Right.
I didn't know about that either.
That was with Ronnie Garvin.
That was with Ronnie Garvin.
And Ronnie Garvin. Of course, last week, Edgar, that incredible thing happening to Oxbaker as Ronnie Garvin just literally took the teeth right out of his mouth and smashed them to the ring into a couple of hundred pieces. And Ox was ranting and raving here about his teeth, so we can only speculate.
They cost $1,175 to replace.
He was more concerned about the monetary thing than anything. Here comes Oxbaker here anyway.
Oxbaker's right here. You know, Ronnie Garvin, you are an idiot. I went out for a steak the other day, ordered it, and realized I couldn't eat it. Do you realize how hungry I was that day watching people eat steak around me? I had to go to the supermarket and get me a can of soup. That's the only... Yeah, it's funny to a lot of people, but Ronnie Garvin, it ain't going to be funny when I get through with you.
And then after the fact, they milked that for a long time. They would show that, you remember, 3 weeks ago when I crushed Oxbaker's false teeth.
Eppenstein says people at WTVQ would pick up on catchphrases and one-liners that wrestlers would say and use them around the station. One person who is often quoted was the big cat, Ernie Ladd.
Ernie was interesting. He was very quiet.
Yeah.
Very quiet. Him and Randy did a promo one time, and Randy did all the talking, and Ernie just stood there. At the very end, about maybe 8 seconds before the end, Ernie just turned and said, "Call somebody." and what's funny, the people, the crew that worked with wrestling, we would all remember all these sayings, and in normal conversation, in normal day-to-day conversation, people would just say these sayings for no reason, like "call somebody."
The influence at the station didn't end there.
We had a custodian at the station, a guy named Charlie Beatty, who was really out there. He would watch in awe of when we did wrestling, And Charlie was a singer and played the guitar. And he came to us one day. He said, "Boys, I made a record." "Okay, Charlie, that's nice. It's called Leaping Lanny Can Fly." I said, "Well, bring us a copy. We want to hear it." So he did. Mm-hmm. It was a really interesting song. I said, "Have you let Lanny hear this?" He says, "No." So we let Lanny hear it. He was just floored by it.
Eppenstein says he hopes ICW is remembered as an innovator for pro wrestling and that the Poffos are remembered for the work they put in to keep ICW running.
I fully believe it was ahead of its time. As Randy once told me, "I'm going to be in Madison Square Garden. I'm going to be a big star." Mm-hmm. He had that goal, and I think it's so great that he accomplished that fame and fortune by such a hard work ethic. Mm-hmm. They would literally drive all night from who knows where doing a match and come into the station there on Thursday morning, and without any sleep possibly, and just give it their all.
While Eppenstein's career in professional wrestling only lasted a couple of years, the memories made have lasted him a lifetime. It was an experience many could only dream of, about a time gone by in a profession that has evolved from local TV spots to billion-dollar broadcast deals. But in the end, the time Eppenstein spent as the voice of ICW was simply priceless.
Okay.
Thank you for being
with us
today.
That is it for International Championship Wrestling. We'll see you next week.
I'm William Adams.